The first thing she did wasn't knock. She smiled. That tight, rehearsed smile people wear when they think the ending is already written. She set a folder on my kitchen table, the same table my great-grandfather planed by hand more than a century ago, and said, "This doesn't have to be ugly." That's when I knew it already was. Inside the folder was a foreclosure notice. Stamped. Signed. Final. According to the HOA, my farmhouse was now out of compliance. According to the bank, I had 30 days. According to her, I was finished. This wasn't just a house. This was 124 years of mournings, harvests, funerals, weddings, and names carved into barn beams. And the HOA president stood there like she was doing me a favor by taking it. She walked the room slowly, heels clicking, eyes scanning like a realtor. "Zoning changed," she said casually. "Development pressure. Property values. You understand?" No. I understood exactly what this was. A land grab. See, over the last year, the HOA had been quietly expanding power. Fines for paint shades. Threats over fence height. Liens over unapproved agricultural structures, also known as my barn. Most people folded. Most people couldn't afford to fight. And that's why she picked me. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that I retired early for a reason. Not because I was tired. Because I was done playing loud games. 20 years earlier, I'd left Wall Street with something better than a headline exit. I left with leverage. The kind that doesn't sit in checking accounts or brag at cocktail parties. But standing there, I didn't say any of that. I asked one simple question. "Who holds the note?" She blinked. Just once. "The bank," she replied. "Obviously." I nodded. Signed nothing. And thanked her for stopping by. She left confident. Relaxed. Victorious. And the second her white Mercedes disappeared down my dirt road, I went downstairs and opened a locked filing cabinet I hadn't touched in years. Because this wasn't about missing payments. It wasn't about compliance. And it definitely wasn't about paint colors. This HOA didn't just want my farmhouse. They wanted the land under it. And the development rights around it. What they didn't realize was that every road in their pristine neighborhood existed because of loans I once approved. Every mailbox sat on land financed by institutions I helped restructure. And the local bank backing their aggressive expansion? That wasn't as local as they thought. By the time the sun set that night, I wasn't angry. I was curious. Because when bullies get greedy, they leave trails. And I was about to follow every single one. Starting with the HOA's finances. Then their lenders. Then the bank they trusted to crush me. And when I finally made my first phone call, the tone on the other end changed fast. Very fast. By morning, I had 3 documents spread across that same old kitchen table. Not foreclosure notices. Not HOA warnings. Bank reports. You see, when you spend years in community banking acquisitions, you don't forget how money really moves. HOAs don't operate on dues alone. They borrow. They leverage future fees. They refinance common areas. Clubhouses. Roads. Beautification projects. And every loan leaves fingerprints. So I started where every quiet war starts. Public records. Within an hour, a pattern emerged. The HOA wasn't just aggressive, it was desperate. Their reserves were thin. Their legal budget was bloated. And 6 months earlier, they'd taken out a sizable loan to fast-track a luxury expansion bordering my farm. An expansion that only worked if my land disappeared. That's when I saw the name of the lender. A mid-sized regional bank. Familiar. Comfortably familiar. The kind of bank Wall Street ignores. The kind I used to buy, merge, and quietly control through holding companies most people never trace. I leaned back in my chair and laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was perfect. At 9:03 a.m., I made a call I hadn't made in years. "Put me through to commercial lending," I said calmly. And tell them it's about their exposure in Cedar Ridge Estates. The pause on the line told me everything. When the loan officer finally came on, his voice was professional. Polite. Careful. Until I said my name. Then silence. A longer one this time. Because while I never put my name on billboards, it still lived in places that mattered. Board minutes. Legacy files. Old acquisition memos. I'm calling about the HOA loan, I said. I'm concerned about their collateral. He tried to reassure me. Strong community. Stable dues. High-value properties. I let him finish. Then I asked, what happens to your loan if their expansion gets tied up in litigation? Another pause. And what happens, I continued, if the land they're counting on becomes unavailable? That's when the tone shifted. Because banks don't fear angry homeowners. They fear uncertainty. I didn't threaten. Didn't raise my voice. I just asked questions. By noon, the bank had scheduled an internal review of the HOA's lending exposure. By 2 o'clock, I received an email from the HOA's legal counsel requesting a clarifying discussion. I ignored it. Instead, I drove into town. I wanted to see the neighborhood they were so proud of. Perfect lawns. Matching mailboxes. Streets named after trees that never grew there. Every house sat on debt. Every family trusted the HOA to keep things running. And none of them knew how close their little paradise was to becoming collateral damage. That's the thing about power plays. The people making them rarely pay the price. Everyone else does. When I got home, another email waited. This one wasn't polite. It accused me of interference. Of attempting to intimidate financial partners. Of undermining community harmony. I smiled. Because now they were emotional. And emotional people make mistakes. I replied with one sentence. I'd like a copy of your current loan covenants and any clauses related to material risk disclosure. That email was read. Then reread. Then forwarded. What the HOA didn't know yet was that their loan agreement had teeth. Teeth sharp enough to bite back if a lender felt misled. And if the bank decided the HOA had concealed risk, the loan could be called. Immediately. Which meant no expansion. No leverage. No pressure campaign against me. Just panic. As the sun dipped low, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a lawyer. It was the HOA president herself. Her voice wasn't smug anymore. It was tight. Controlled. And afraid. She said, "We need to talk." And for the first time since she'd walked into my kitchen uninvited. I agreed. She didn't come alone this time. That told me everything before a single word was spoken. 2 cars pulled into my driveway just before sunset. Her white Mercedes. And a black sedan I recognized immediately. Legal counsel. They stepped inside like guests, not conquerors. Different posture. Different energy. No folders slammed on the table. No confident pacing. She sat. Waited. Watched me pour coffee like this was any other evening. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she began. That's always how it starts when leverage changes hands. Her lawyer jumped in quickly. Spoke about community standards. About cooperation. About finding mutually beneficial outcomes. I let them talk. Then I slid one document across the table. Not a threat. Not a demand. A copy of their own loan agreement. Specifically, Section 14.2, Material Adverse Change. The lawyer stopped mid-sentence. I said nothing. The HOA president's eyes darted between the pages, scanning words she'd never bothered to read before signing. I tapped the paragraph. Any undisclosed legal risk affecting collateral value gives the lender the right to reassess, reprice, or recall the loan. Silence. You built your expansion plan around my land, I said calmly. You filed zoning challenges. You issued fines. You initiated foreclosure. I took a sip of coffee. And you never disclosed any of that to your bank. Her face strained of color. The lawyer cleared his throat. We're willing to pause enforcement actions, he said carefully. Pause. That was the word. Not cancel. Not reverse. Pause. They still thought this was a negotiation. I leaned forward. This farm isn't a bargaining chip, I said. It's not leverage. It's not surplus. I let that sink in. Every step you've taken to pressure me increases your lender's exposure. And they know it now. The HOA president tried to recover. Accused me of strong-arming. Of exploiting technicalities. I didn't argue. I simply asked, did you tell your members you borrowed against an expansion that depends on land you don't own? That question hit harder than any threat. Because HOAs fear one thing more than lawsuits. Revolt. If homeowners learned their dues-backed association had gambled on seizing private land? That the clubhouse, the pool, the roads, all of it, were collateral? There would be chaos. The lawyer stood. We'll need to reassess our position, he said. Translation. They were running out of moves. Before they left, she turned back. You don't have to do this, she said quietly. We can make it go away. That's when I told her the truth. I'm not doing anything, I said. I'm just standing still. They left in silence. That night, my phone rang again. Different number. The bank. This time, the voice on the other end wasn't cautious. It was concerned. They'd completed their review. Discovered omissions. Unreported legal actions. Aggressive enforcement inconsistent with stated risk profiles. In simple terms, the HOA had lied. The bank was issuing a formal notice of default unless full disclosures were made within 10 days. 10 days. Enough time for panic. Enough time for mistakes. The next morning, signs appeared in the neighborhood. Emergency HOA meeting. Mandatory attendance. That's when the story stopped being about me. Because once homeowners start asking questions, control evaporates. And the people who built their power in silence? They crumble in public. I knew then the farmhouse was safe. But the HOA? They were about to learn what happens when you weaponize paperwork against someone who helped write the rules. And I hadn't even played my final card yet. The meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. By 6:15, the parking lot was full. I didn't go inside right away. I stood across the street and watched neighbors arrive, confused, annoyed, curious. Because when an HOA calls an emergency meeting, people assume the worst. Special assessments. Fee hikes. Legal trouble. They were right on all three. I slipped into the back row just as the HOA president took the podium. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. She opened with vague language. Procedural issues. Temporary financing concerns. Misunderstandings with external parties. No one likes being talked down to. Especially not people paying monthly dues. A man in the second row raised his hand. Are our fees going up? A woman near the aisle asked. Is the pool expansion cancelled? The questions came fast after that. That's when the lawyer stood. Big mistake. He tried to explain loan structures and risk mitigation. Used words like liquidity and exposure. The room turned hostile. Someone shouted, Just tell us if our houses are at risk. That's when I stood up. I hadn't planned to speak. But momentum has a way of pulling you in. I think they deserve a straight answer, I said. Every head turned. The HOA president froze when she recognized me. I introduced myself simply. No titles. No history. Then I asked one question. Did the HOA disclose to the bank that it was attempting to seize private land through foreclosure to fund this expansion? The silence was deafening. The lawyer objected. Procedural nonsense. But the damage was done. Because homeowners understand one thing very clearly. Risk. Another voice spoke up. Are our homes collateral? The lawyer hesitated. Too long. Yes, someone whispered. That was it. The room erupted. People stood. Shouted. Demanded records. The HOA president tried to regain control, but power doesn't come back once it's exposed. Within minutes, someone motioned for an independent audit. Another demanded a vote of no confidence. I slipped out before it ended. I didn't need to see the collapse. I'd seen it before. The next day, my phone buzzed nonstop. Emails. Calls. Messages from neighbors who'd never spoken to me before. Apologies. Thanks. Questions. By noon, the bank issued its formal notice. The HOA had 10 days to cure the default or face loan recall. And without that loan? No expansion. No leverage. No justification for targeting my farm. But here's the part they still didn't know. The bank wasn't just reviewing the loan. They were reviewing the HOA board. And when banks start questioning governance, they start cutting ties. Late that afternoon, I received a call from the HOA president. No attitude left now. Just exhaustion. We'll withdraw the foreclosure, she said. Immediately. I waited. And the fines? I asked. We'll reverse them. I waited again. And the zoning challenges? Another pause. All withdrawn. It sounded like surrender. But surrender from people like her always comes with conditions. There's just one thing, she added. Of course there was. She wanted a non-disclosure agreement. Silence. No further involvement. I smiled to myself. Because silence was never my goal. Accountability was. And the bank? They weren't done either. As I hung up, another call came through. This one from a number I hadn't seen before. A senior executive at the bank. He said, "We'd like to discuss your broader involvement in the area." That's when I knew this story wasn't over. Not even close. We met at the bank's regional office the next morning. Glass walls. Quiet hallways. The kind of place where decisions get made without ever making the news. The executive didn't waste time. "We didn't realize how much overlap there was," he said carefully, "between your past work and our current exposure." That was banker language for "we messed up." I told him the truth. I wasn't looking to buy anything. I wasn't looking to take over. I just wanted my farm left alone. He nodded, then slid a folder across the table. Inside were internal risk notes. Emails. Concerns raised, and ignored, about the HOA's behavior months earlier. They'd known something was off. They just hadn't acted. Until now. "The HOA board is no longer considered a reliable counterparty," he said. "We're preparing to exit." Exit. That word carries weight in finance. It meant the loan would be sold. Or called. Or restructured under terms the HOA couldn't survive. Either way, their reign was ending. When I got home, a certified letter was waiting. Official withdrawal of foreclosure. Written confirmation of reversed fines. A formal apology, carefully worded by attorneys, of course. But apologies don't rebuild trust. Over the next few days, things unraveled fast. Board members resigned. An emergency election was scheduled. The expansion project was scrapped entirely. Homeowners demanded transparency. Audits were ordered. Law firms started sniffing around. And then something unexpected happened. Neighbors began stopping by my farm. Not to complain. To listen. They wanted to know how close they'd come to losing control. How quietly power had shifted. How an HOA meant to protect values had nearly burned the whole place down. I told them the same thing every time. Read what you sign. And never assume authority equals competence. One afternoon, the former HOA president showed up alone. No suit. No lawyer. Just tired. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't threaten. She asked one question. "How did you see it coming?" I looked out across the fields before answering. "Because people who build things think differently than people who manage them," I said. "You saw land. I saw legacy." She nodded slowly. Then she left. A week later, the bank finalized its decision. They sold the HOA loan to an institutional investor known for one thing: zero patience. Terms tightened. Oversight increased. Every future decision required approval. The HOA would exist, but it would never dominate again. As for me, I went back to my routines. Morning walks. Fixing fences. Watching seasons change like they always have. But every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of that white Mercedes driving through town. Slower now. More careful. Because power doesn't disappear when it's challenged. It learns. And the lesson this time was simple. You don't threaten someone's heritage unless you're prepared to lose everything you built trying to take it. And just when I thought it was over, a letter arrived with a return address I hadn't expected. A federal agency. Requesting information about the HOA and the bank, and a pattern they were starting to see across the region. Turns out, my quiet little standoff had opened a much bigger door. One that couldn't be closed. The letter wasn't aggressive. That's what made it unsettling. No accusations. No threats. Just a calm request for cooperation regarding potential irregularities in HOA bank relationships. When federal agencies use that phrasing, it means one thing. They already know something. They just want to know how much you know. I called the number listed and spoke to a woman whose voice never changed tone. Not once. She asked about timelines, meetings, pressure tactics. I answered honestly. Because the truth was already documented in emails, loan filings, zoning complaints, and rushed decisions made by people who thought no one would ever look closely. Turns out, my HOA wasn't unique. Across the county, similar associations had been doing the same thing. Leveraging power. Targeting legacy landowners. Pushing foreclosures to unlock development deals. Same playbook. Different neighborhoods. And the same banks kept showing up in the paperwork. That's when I realized this was never just about my farmhouse. It was about a system that worked because most people didn't have time, money, or knowledge to fight back. A week later, the emergency HOA election happened. New board. New bylaws. Immediate moratorium on enforcement actions tied to development. The first vote they passed? Permanent protection for agricultural and legacy properties. No more compliance loopholes. No more selective enforcement. It passed unanimously. The room actually applauded. But while the neighborhood healed, the pressure moved elsewhere. The bank called again. This time, different executives. Different tone. They weren't asking questions anymore. They were explaining. Federal review. Compliance audits. Temporary suspension of certain lending activities. In plain English? Heads were rolling. And once regulators step in, silence becomes impossible. Local papers picked up the story. Carefully at first. HOA loan practices under review. No names yet. But insiders knew. Then came the resignations. Bank executives stepping down. To pursue other opportunities. Consultants brought in. Policies rewritten overnight. The machine was being dismantled in public. One evening, as I walked the fence line at sunset, a neighbor stopped his truck. "You know," he said, "we thought you were just a quiet old guy who didn't want change." I smiled. "That's how quiet wars are won," I replied. What surprised me most wasn't the victory. It was the aftermath. People started asking harder questions. About HOAs. About banks. About who really benefits when community improvement becomes a weapon. And they stopped assuming authority meant legitimacy. A month later, I received the final call from the federal investigator. "We're closing this phase," she said. "But more is coming." I believed her. Because once you expose a pattern, you can't unsee it. As for the HOA president, she didn't vanish. She took a consulting role out of state. No headlines. No charges. Just distance. That's how these stories usually end. Not with sirens. With silence. The farmhouse still stands. Same creaky floors. Same table. Same land stretching back to 1899. But now, there's something else in the air. Awareness. Because every neighborhood has a story like this waiting to happen. Most just never get told. Unless someone decides not to sign the papers. Unless someone knows where the leverage lives. And unless someone is patient enough to let powerful people destroy themselves with their own paperwork. The question isn't whether this could happen where you live. It's whether you'd see it coming in time. Because the next letter might not be a warning. It might be a deadline. The strangest part wasn't the win. It was the quiet that followed. No more letters. No more surprise meetings. No more threats dressed up as community standards. Just land. Breathing again. A few weeks after everything settled, I sat at that old kitchen table and ran my hand along the worn edge. The same grooves my great-grandfather carved without knowing it would one day be defended with bank covenants instead of pitchforks. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about money. It never was. It was about momentum. HOAs don't wake up evil. Banks don't start predatory. They drift theirs slowly, one unchecked decision at a time, until someone pushes back. And most people never do. They're busy. They're tired. They assume the system is fair. That assumption is expensive. The new HOA board stopped by one afternoon. No suits. No scripts. They brought documents, real ones this time. Updated bylaws. Transparent budgets. Clear limits on authority. They asked for input. Not approval. Input. That alone told me everything had changed. Across the region, other associations started revising rules. Banks rewrote lending policies tied to HOAs. Developers quietly backed away from easy land. Not because they became ethical. Because risk became visible. Every system only works in the dark. As for me, I didn't become a hero. I didn't start a movement. I went back to being the guy fixing fences and watching the seasons turn. But every now and then, someone reaches out. A farmer. A homeowner. Someone staring at a letter that feels final. I tell them the same thing. Read slower than the person rushing you. Ask who really benefits. And remember, power hates attention. Because the moment people look closely, it loses its shape. The farmhouse still belongs to my family. The land still tells its story. And the neighborhood learned a lesson it won't forget. You can bully people who don't know the rules. You can intimidate those without leverage. But when you threaten someone's heritage, you'd better be certain they don't own the foundation beneath your feet. Because sometimes, the quiet neighbor you underestimate, he's the reason your whole system exists. And he's patient enough to let it collapse on its own. So if you're watching this and thinking, that could never happen to me, that's exactly what they're counting on.